what? I watched a video of families, mothers, grandmothers and children marching with their Union Jacks through Southampton, where they were confronted, intimidated and attacked by gangs of Muslim men. Reverse the roles. An issue upsets the Islamic community, their women and families come out and loads of young English lads attack them. Just wouldn't happen. And if it did happen, they'd come out in their thousands from all around the country. They'd probably burn the country, they would, yeah? The point is, I believe there's an event this Sunday after what happened to these innocent families trying to have their say in their community about the problems they're facing. Please, if you can, go to Southampton and support this community. Go and make sure that any women and children that come out are not violently confronted by gangs of Muslim men. This doesn't mean go and be aggressive, go and be violent because we lose. But go and show solidarity with the community of Southampton and the men of England or Britain. Go and protect those families from facing an onslaught of intimidation by violent, hostile Muslim youth. It's an absolute liberty watching that video. And where's the condemnation from politicians, from media, from commentators about the intimidation that our women and children faced in Southampton? Again, if you can go, please go Sunday. Be safe. Don't be the ones instigating problems, but make sure you're there to make sure that the community of Southampton can have their say.
Tommy Robinson's speech is a sharp mix of nationalism and populist outrage. He portrays British families, mothers, grandmothers, and children as innocent victims attacked in Southampton, using this imagery to evoke emotion and patriotism. By saying reverse the roles, he accuses politicians and media of hypocrisy, suggesting they would react differently if the attackers were English and the victims Muslim. This framing fuels a sense of injustice and double standard. His call for a peaceful Sunday rally lets him appear as a defender of communities rather than an instigator, while still channeling anger and unity. In short, the message blends fear, loyalty, and defiance, casting Robinson as the voice of ordinary Britons, against both outsiders and a silent establishment.
And it was interesting to hear Jess Phillips's reaction to what Chris Philp had to say, with just saying that she will always listen to victims. And she pointed out, I think, a very key detail, which perhaps some of the Conservatives had actually missed. In their call for a judge to lead this inquiry, Jess Phillips rightly pointed out that all institutions have failed these victims. It's not just the police and social workers, as some are talking about. This is a system-wide failure. And she points out specifically, I mean, we've had these survivors in this very studio talking about this in the past, about how they were criminalised by the courts and by the Crown Prosecution Service, and judges heard evidence and told these girls who were being exploited by gangs that they were worthy of punishment as well. We've also had victims and survivors speaking regularly about how their children were taken away from them, and Jess Phillips echoing those points there. I think that is a tricky one for the Conservatives to respond to. They need to think about, when they say, oh, it can't be that profession, it needs to be a different profession. What I'm hearing from survivors, actually, in contrast to sort of a lot of the political rowing on this, is we need to look at individuals, not their profession. You heard Paul Waugh there, the Rochdale MP, defending Jim Gamble, for example, who he rightly says does have a fearless track record of pursuing abusers.
And this is the man who's likely to become the chair. One
of the two candidates, I say two candidates, we revealed an hour ago that the other candidate, Annie Hudson, had withdrawn herself from the process. We understand amid recent media focus, she no longer wanted to be involved, which could spark some questions about the suitability of that candidate, because this is obviously going to be a very live and engaging issue politically, as we've just seen in the House of Commons. Also there, Robbie Moore, the MP for Keighley and Ilkley, holding a piece of paper, which Jess Phillips disparaged him, waving his paper and looking smug, she said, again pointing to some of the energy, referring to Tom in the chamber. He was referring to her statement to the Home Affairs Select Committee yesterday. Jess Phillips said it was untrue to say that they hadn't approached judges, and that it was untrue to say the scope of the inquiry had been expanded. But we do know, and we'll be sharing some of this later, that NWG, that charity, in their liaison with these survivors, they have been asking them, do they want the scope to be expanded? That has been asked of survivors in writing. Now, as you've heard Jess Phillips there saying, it's not the Home Office asking that, it's NWG. But this is
a charity.
This is a charity, but this is a charity which has been commissioned by the Home Office to do this, and it is a panel set up by the government, in effect. So they have been asked if they want to expand it beyond grooming gangs, and I think that is a bit of a difficult one for the government to say, we're very focused on grooming gangs, we're laser focused, in fact, on this, but at the same time, for this panel, many of them who've been ignored for so long, being asked about expanding it.
The other thing that Robbie Moore said was about whether or not some areas would have the full throttled inquiry, whether some councils would be able to say, actually, no thanks, we don't want an inquiry here, we'll have a listening exercise or whatever else. Jess Phillips seemed perhaps most impassioned coming back to that accusation.
Oldham is very interesting because we revealed start of this year that they had their requests for an inquiry rejected, and I think that was what really sort of re-sparked this conversation and eventually led to the inquiry. But since then, there has been a lot of frustration, I'm hearing from all the sources and contacts we have in Oldham, about how long this process is taking since the government said they would have an inquiry in Oldham. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary in April, said that there would be at least 5 local inquiries. Clearly that's changed since the national inquiry was announced in June, but we haven't really had that as an announcement. Robbie Moore asking about what's going on in Oldham, how are they being approached by the Home Office. Jess Phillips said there is no council that's going to be sort of allowed to wiggle out of this. However, from my understanding, it's the other way around. The Home Office is going to Oldham. We reported this earlier this month, and they suggested to them that perhaps Oldham could have a truth project instead of an inquiry. That wasn't being requested by the council, that was being proposed by the central government, being proposed by the Home Office. So perhaps there's some space for those questions to continue.
Oh, and there was a moment where it may have felt to people that Jess Phillips was being dismissive of the two people, the two survivors who were involved in the inquiry, who have stepped away from it.
Yeah, I think Fiona Goddard and Eliane Reynolds have both appeared on GB News talking about that decision in the last day or so. I mean, Jess Phillips said she will always listen to survivors, even if they're not on the panel that's been gathered for the Home Office. And it's clear she means that. I mean, we know, often survivors that we have met through this work, they'll say, I'm also in touch with Jess Phillips. We know that she spends a lot of time speaking to victims and survivors, and I think there'll be a lot of regret on the Conservative benches watching Jess Phillips making these statements, because she is saying and ordering things that they never did. She is right to say that police forces are being ordered to collect ethnicity data in a way that hadn't been done before. The Conservatives put it forward as an amendment earlier this year, but well, they were in power for quite a long time before that. Didn't need to be an amendment until 2025. Labour has launched a national inquiry into grooming gangs. There are lots of questions about the scope and where it will go, but all the noises we're getting from government directly at the moment is that they will focus specifically on this grooming gangs issue. Some survivors, however, are saying that in their conversations with the panel, that's being expanded. So they need to be reassured.
Charlie Peters' statement, "All institutions have failed the victims," reflects a deep crisis of trust in Britain's handling of grooming gang cases. His comment, following the resignation of survivors from the inquiry panel, highlights the systemic breakdown of accountability across government, police, and local authorities. Peters suggests that the failures go beyond individual errors. They are institutional. The people meant to protect victims instead created a cycle of neglect, bureaucracy, and political cowardice. His reaction exposes public frustration that, even after years of inquiries, survivors still feel unheard and unsafe. The phrase captures a moral indictment of the state. When every institution fails, victims are left to relive trauma without justice. In essence, it's not just about one inquiry collapsing. It's about the collapse of faith in the system itself.